Hello, my name is Yulia Kumичева, and I'm very happy to welcome you to my online workshop, which is called This Was Then and This Is Now. We're going to talk about transforming activities into tasks, and I'm also going to talk about how we can use task-based learning to help our students navigate the new reality. So a couple of words about me. I'm an English teacher and a teacher trainer. I've been teaching English since 2012, but you might know me because of my blog pretty much everywhere. It's Cup of ELT. So I blog about English language teaching, advanced methodology, and language. So a couple of months ago, my career changed. That's why I have chosen the name of my workshop, which is This Was Then and This Is Now. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened and what I used to do and what I do right now. So I used to teach advanced learners only. I would teach someone who is like C1 and above. I used to teach teachers exclusively, and we would run courses, which is like methodology and advanced English, C1, C2. I used to teach highly motivated, self-efficient learners who have no problems learning on their own, very autonomous. And then a couple of months ago, it all took a very dramatic turn. So I took on some new students. I volunteered with A1 adult students who had this sense of added urgency because they had to use English in their life right now. Some of my old students had new priorities. For example, some had to relocate, and all of a sudden discussing methodology in English was not their first priority. They had to get employed. They had to open bank accounts. So it all changed. And my students who used to be super motivated, highly efficient, some of them suffered loss of motivation. Some were even on the brink of quitting the classes because some of them had financial reasons. Others felt that there were other more important things going on and they should direct their energy and attention elsewhere. So with that in mind, I decided to give task-based learning a try because I believe that task-based learning is going to help us mitigate the effect of all of that happening. And I'm sure that a lot of us can relate to that. We probably have experienced all of that to some extent.
Хотите постоянно развиваться в преподавании иностранных языков? Школа Дмитрия Никитина проводит образовательные тренинги, конференции и курсы для преподавателей. Подробности о событиях можно узнать по ссылке в описании.
This is the workshop plan. This is what we will be talking about today. You can see there is a Spidegram, which is now empty, but by the end of the workshop, we will have it all completed. A little spoiler here, a mind map and a chart and a graph is a typical task for a task-based learning. Surprise, surprise. So we are going to be doing exactly that today. So we will talk about what TBL means, what makes a task a task. We will discuss what different types of tasks are there, talk about the selling points, the benefits, how we can build it into our lessons, and then there will be a practical take where we transform activities into tasks. So let's start with criteria. So what is TBL? What is task-based learning? TBL is an approach to language learning where learners complete tasks. You may say something like, oh, thank you, Captain Obvious. Your job is done here. It's all clear. Task-based learning is about task. No surprise here. But what is a task? If you think about it, task can mean many different things. Anything from presenting with a presentation or designing a poster or taking a part in a job interview, this all can be a task. And the problem is that some teachers can't really agree on what a task is. I personally really like a definition by Rod Ellis, and I'm going to use that. He underlines 4 criteria of a task. So the first one is that task should focus on a meaning. And they believe that tasks are not really like a menu of structures that we use that we need to learn, practice, and rehearse. We use language to mean something. We want to communicate a meaningful message. We want to get that across. We want to share what we experience, what we think. So the focus there, the primary focus, is on message and getting the message across. There is a gap when you complete a task, and the gap could be, for example, information or an opinion gap. Let's say that I know something that you don't. That's why I'm communicating some ideas to you. This is what's happening right now. I'm telling you about task-based learning. Ideally, this is something new. That's why you have a genuine reason to listen to me. I have a genuine reason to communicate this to you. There also could be some opinion gap. For example, if we were to discuss our favorite film, chances are we would have different opinions about what film is the best. That's why we would communicate to fill in this opinion gap. The next criteria by Rod Ellis is linguistic freedom, which means that our students are free to choose whatever linguistic resources they have in order to communicate the message. So they can use the words that they know, they can use the grammar that they know. As long as they get the message across, it works. It's all great. So if there are some words that they don't know, they have to make do, they have to improvise, use nonverbal communication. So again, this is all about how we communicate in real life. And last but not least, there is a clear communicative outcome when we perform a task. And communicative outcome means that we communicate to achieve something. For example, we talk together to compare our experiences or solve a problem. So it's all about putting the achievement of the communicative task first. So now we have the criteria all sorted. Let's move on to a little practice exercise here. Let's imagine that your friend is visiting your city and they ask you about must-see places. So you need to record a voice message sharing your ideas. Do you think that this activity is a task? You can pause your video right here and say whether you think it's a task or just an exercise. And I'm going to help you with reminding about the criteria that we just talked about. So what do you think? Is this a task or is this just an activity? So let's go step by step. So we do get the message across. We need to communicate an idea. We mean something in English. So yes, we get the message across. Perfect. There is a gap, clearly. We know something that our friend doesn't. We are talking about our city, and chances are our friend is visiting it for the first time. There's linguistic freedom. We can say, oh, this place is good, or I can say, oh, few people fail to be charmed by this amazing, breathtaking place. The message is the same. I can use different language to communicate this idea. And clearly there is an outcome, there is a detailed itinerary, so our friend knows where to go, and there is a voice memo, so something physical, something tangible, something non-linguistics. So answering this question, is this a task? Yes, it is. This is a prime example of a task. These are some typical tasks which I have taken from a great book, which is Doing Task-Based Teaching, amazing book, and they all meet the same criteria. Let me give you an example of my favorite one, which is jigsaw tasks. I love them so much. So jigsaw tasks are a collaborative learning method where each of your students get a certain part of the text. For example, they read to a little paragraph, or maybe they hear a little part of the text, then they come together and share what they have heard. So they basically put it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. Let's see if it meets the criteria. Let me tell you about the lesson that I recently taught. So World Economic Forum, every year they publish the global risk reports. It's free, you can download it, you can scan this QR code and get it there. And what I love about it, each page of this report has a separate article about a global risk that we're about to face. For example, air pollution, cybercrime, I don't know, stuff like that. It's very insightful. For example, they predicted the pandemic in 2019. So yeah, they have some insight into what we are about to experience. And what you can do as a teacher, and what I did, I gave each of my students a page that I wanted them to read and take notes of. They read it, took notes, and then shared, and then discussed what problem requires immediate attention. So this is a jigsaw task. Yeah, we focus on the message first, meaning first we want to communicate an idea. There is a gap. So student A knows something that student B doesn't. There is linguistic freedom. They can use what language they will skip if they don't understand something. They can paraphrase it when they are communicating their ideas. And there is clear communicative outcome. All of these pieces come together. It's all a big, beautiful picture that we design with our students. So as you can see, these tasks also meet the criteria. So it's all there. Okay, now with criteria sorted, let's move on to types of tasks. What I'm going to be talking about next is not an extensive list of task types. There could be more. I'm just going to talk about the ones that I find particularly interesting right now. Again, this is not the final list. There are way more tasks that I'm going to be talking about. So the first couple of tasks is output-based and input-based tasks. So if your friend is asking you to record a voice message, this is going to be an output-based task. So we want our students to produce some text. And then if you think about our jigsaw reading task, we can transform it a little bit. So I can ask my students to read, let's say about 3 problems that we are about to experience, and I can ask them to rank them in the order of urgency. So it's not really that they produce the language, they read it, and then they make a list of the problems that they believe are the most urgent ones. So some people believe that input-based tasks are a little bit less cognitively challenging. So you may start with input-based tasks and then slowly introduce more and more output-based tasks for your students. So let's say that you have a beginner student who is not very familiar with the concept of task-based learning in general. So what you can do is give them input-based tasks first, so they can read, pick up some words, and then move on to output-based tasks.
Хотите постоянно развиваться в преподавании иностранных языков? Школа Дмитрия Никитина проводит образовательные тренинги, конференции и курсы для преподавателей. Подробности о событиях можно узнать по ссылке в описании.
All right, the next couple of tasks, it's real life and pedagogic tasks. Real life, it's pretty self-explanatory. Again, this is the form that I used with my A1 students. Some of them had to relocate, and there are a lot of forms that they need to fill in. So what I did, I took the form that they had to fill in, and we practiced answering questions, spelling words out during our lesson. So real life means that this is something that we do with the language in real life. Some teachers who use TBL believe that we should use real-life tasks only. I don't necessarily agree, because I think there are some pedagogic tasks that can have a lot of value. Let me show you an example. This one is taken from Evolve 1. So this is A1 course book. And you can see a handsome gentleman here, Jason. He's just bought a new apartment, and there is a list of things that he could buy. And what our students are asked to do is to make a shopping list with an imaginary $1,000. Now, the question is, how realistic is this task? How likely our students are to make a shopping list for someone else? I think it's not very likely. It's not really probable. We may make a shopping list for ourselves, but not for someone else. However, the language that they're going to be using while completing this task is going to be very productive. So they can use this language later on. Although the task is not really real life, it still has a lot of learning potential. So yeah, that's another couple of tasks here. Another one, it is closed and open tasks. So closed task, this is a prime example of that. When you give each of your students a picture and you ask them to talk about the pictures, trying to find the differences. There is a limited number of differences. Like if you look at this picture, there are only 5. So when they finish describing the picture, that's it. There is not much they can do about it. So it's a closed task. Let me give you an example of an open task. This is what my teen students wrote. We had a topic of environment, and I asked them to write an Instagram post. Here, they could do whatever. They could write a post about any problem. They could use whatever language they had at their disposal. So it's an open-ended task here. And then last but not least, these are focused and unfocused tasks. So let me give you an example of a lesson that I recently taught. We had to make a list of 6 apps that we often use. This was an online lesson that I taught, so I just gave them those iPhone templates and I asked them to drag the icons, and then they could write a short description. I let them use whatever resources they had, like Apple Store descriptions and stuff like that. Then they had to talk about their choice, explain why they picked these very apps. And then based on what they heard their partners say, they had to suggest another app, what their partner may like. You can see that there is no linguistic focus here. We just talked about the apps. We didn't practice any particular language item. We just talked about apps and phones. And then let me give you an example of a focus task that I recently taught. So here I need to give you some background. We revised functional language of agreement and disagreement first. So that was a previous lesson. And then I gave my students some statements, which were all about charity. I asked them to write a number to represent what they think, whether they agree with the statement or disagree. And then they had to discuss the statements. So again, just because we had this focus on functional language of expressing agreement and disagreement, we focused on that very thing during that task. This task, by the way, is a part of a free worksheet that I designed. It's about charity, and I even have a video of like a step-by-step guide how I designed this worksheet, how it came to be. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code and get it all for you. Okay, so these are the types of tasks. Again, there are more than that, but I just want to talk about these 4 pairs. All right, let's move on to the selling points of task-based learning, the benefits, what makes it so special. I'm going to briefly talk about 3 advantages of TBL. The first one is that it focuses and centers around communication, which I think is lovely. This is what we use the language for. And again, the completion of a communicative task is at the center of a task, which is amazing. I love this. It is connected to real life. First of all, because we have real life tasks, which let us do something with the language, which is similar to what our students are using the language for, like completing the form, writing the emails, presenting with, I don't know, some slides and stuff. And then even if we are taking pedagogic tasks or something of that sort, we still ask our students what they think, what they experienced. So it's very connected to them. And because of that, it helps to sustain motivation because students feel this connection. And then not only do our students develop language, like grammar or vocabulary, they also develop communicative competences when they perform tasks. For example, when students do the task and they don't know the word, they make do, they make up a synonym, they try to think about ways of conveying the message. And again, it reflects the way we communicate in real life. Sometimes we need to repair misunderstandings. Sometimes we need to address the issues. And this is exactly how communicating in real life is, which I think is super empowering. All of that sounds amazing, but I believe that the best advantage of TBL is the knowledge gap. And if I had to choose one thing that I absolutely love about TBL, that would be the knowledge gap. The knowledge gap is the difference between the first time your students try to complete the task and the second attempt. And there is usually an improvement. Imagine you ask your students to write an email for the first time, and then a couple of, I don't know, weeks, lessons later, you ask them to write it one more time. There's going to be an improvement. So what can we do to help our students bridge this gap? Task-based learning does exactly that. So we begin with the pre-task stage. So during the pre-task stage, we can discuss the topic to activate what our students know. We can generate some ideas, do some brainstorming. We can pre-teach some key language that students might need to complete the task. We need to make sure that the task goals are clear so students can do the task on their own. Maybe we can demonstrate how we perform the task. Then comes task number 1. And the idea here is that students need to do that independently with minimum intervention on our end. So we shouldn't really, jump at any opportunity to help our students. We should kind of balance remoteness and attentiveness. We need to make sure that students are on the task, observe them, carefully, but not interfere much. So what happens is that we just monitor them. After we observed our students complete the task for the first time, then comes the post-task stage. And this is where the teaching comes into play. This is something that we're used to. So this is where we give feedback on what we observed, on what we monitored. And feedback can take many different shapes and forms. We can give feedback on the content, whether they managed to achieve the goal, on the process, whether they found the process enjoyable. If yes, what made it enjoyable? If not, what could have made it more enjoyable? And of course, we can give content on emergent language. For example, if you notice that your students are making mistakes in some places, in some sentences, you can fix that. Or maybe you notice that there is something that they don't know, but they can benefit from, you can teach that as well. And last but not least, we can do some conscious raising text mining. A lot of tasks are associated with modal texts. For example, you ask your students to write an email and then you compare it with another email that was written by you or some other student. Or you want your students to express their agreement and then you ask them to listen to someone expressing their agreement or disagreement with the topic. So you can mine the text for some useful language or organizational patterns. And then last but not least, students need to do the task one more time based on what you taught them. It doesn't have to happen within one lesson. It can happen some lessons later. But the idea is that the repetition of the tasks gives students improved performance. It improves their retention, they remember the information better, and they see visible and measurable improvement compared to what they had in the first place. Now they know something, they feel this progress, which is awesome. Let me give you a couple of examples of knowledge gap. This was the task that this was the lesson that I taught with my C1 students. So we talked about a recent food trend. For example, it's now very popular to buy free from sugar, free from milk foods. So we looked at the graphs that represent this trend and we just talked about them. Then I asked my students to write a description of any graph that they liked. And you can see this is a very solid first attempt. The language is there, the content is accurate, so it's all great, it's all amazing. What we did then, we analyzed some descriptions, some sentences, and I focused on vocabulary, like some fancy phrases like as can be inferred from the graph, or just over, or just under 40% of the respondents cited, blah, blah, blah. So I taught them some cool phrases that they can use to write it, to squeeze it all in their graph description. So we did a little bit of control practice and freer practice. Then later in that lesson, I asked the student to rewrite their paragraph, same graph, same paragraph. I kept task 1 and then task 2 close to each other so they could see. And I asked them to edit that based on what we have learned. As you can see, I have highlighted some of the parts. So a student managed to introduce some fancy vocabulary that I taught. But what I really like here is that if you look at the last sentence of task 2, so this is a conclusion about the graph. Not only do we describe the graph, but we also add some ideas, some personal ideas. This is what we observed in the model text that we were working on, and student managed to introduce that into the text. So again, it's not only the language, but like the organizational patterns, the content that we include in the text. Let me show you a different one. This was a lesson with A1 students. And the task was completing a job interview. As a pre-task, I taught them some phrases that they can use, some lexes that they can use to describe their positive characteristics. And then I asked them questions like, what are your strengths? What are you proud of? Talk about yourself or something like that. And then when I asked one of my students, she couldn't do the task at all. So it was, she just told me the story in Russian. I listened to her. I helped her with formulating her ideas in English, but I didn't stop it there. When we finished our lesson, I recorded a voice message and sent it to Telegram, and this is what it sounded like. This is a story for Mariam. When I was working as a real estate agent, I helped my client to find the flat that he needed. It was a very difficult case. He was looking for a flat for a very long time, but I am very good at communicating, so I asked him precise questions and I helped him to find what he needed. So basically that was me telling the story, and then the student had to listen to it at home. And then during our next lesson, I asked her the same question like I did last time. And then she did a fabulous job answering that question. I could feel that she practiced a lot, and it was very relevant because it was her own thing. And of course, if you compare it to task 1, where she couldn't answer the question at all, and then when she produced a beautiful piece of text, you could definitely see some visible and measurable improvement. So I want to make a quick comment about bridging the knowledge gap right here. So with my writing lesson where we had graphs, I could make some educated guesses about what my students might benefit from. So I could prepare the lesson before teaching it. With my second lesson that I told you about, this was the first time I ever talked about job with these students, because these are my new students of mine. So this was a shot in the dark. I just came into the lesson being ready to teach whatever life throws at me. I couldn't plan that I'm going to be teaching that to that student. So that's what makes TBL teacher's life very exciting. You never know what you're going to be teaching. So sometimes you plan one thing and then students need something else, and you need to kind of respond to that. You need to follow your students' lead and see what they need first and then address that. So these are the advantages. Again, I want to put the knowledge gap first because I think this is the most significant thing right here. Let's move on to the juicy part, how we can use TBLT into our lessons. Before we look at some TBL lessons, let's look at some typical course book. This is face-to-face B1, so this is not beginners. These are B1 plus. And the main aim of this lesson that we're going to be looking into is practice and revise comparatives and superlatives. So you can see the course book right here. You can scan the QR code to get a better look if you need to kind of zoom in and stuff. But let me quickly guide you through the course book right here. We start with a little bit of revision. So students need to sort words which are related to houses in 3 categories and then talk about what they find to be the most important. Then there is exposure to the language. So the context is that 2 friends are looking for a new place to live, and they need to choose between these 3 homes that we can see on page 38. So this is a little bit of listening for gist. We need to decide which home they chose eventually. Then there is language focus. There is more tasks which are related to that listening exercise. So we need to identify which house each sentence is referring to. And you can see that some parts of the text are highlighted. So what they're doing here is they are drawing our students' attention to a certain language item, which is comparatives and superlatives here. Now we move on to guided questions and formulation of the rules. So they ask them about comparatives, superlatives. They check against the grammar reference in the course book. So that's it. Then there is some control practice and some freer practice. As you might guess, the task right here, what they use is the guided discovery, but you can imagine a PPP lesson with presentation, practice, production, or teach test lesson. So it all works okay. So what about TBL? How do we structure our lessons when we work with a TBL? So there are 2 types of lessons. There could be a task-supported lesson and a task-based lesson. With a task-supported lesson, we create a task that helps us to practice a very specific language item, for example, superlatives or comparatives. So you have your standard lesson procedure, guided discovery, PPP, TTT, and then you take one of the activities and you transform it into a meaningful task. Task-based lesson is a little bit different because we build the whole lesson around the task. So it's not the language that we focus on, but the task. And the framework of the lesson is going to be different. So we have pre-task, task 1, post-task, task 2. You already know that. We have discussed that already. So to recap, the biggest difference, the task-supported lesson is where we focus on a particular language item, and task-based lesson is where we base the whole lesson around the text. So let's start with the task-supported lesson. I'm thinking about changing the final exercise and transforming it into a task. Let's have a look at what they ask our students to complete here. So we need to choose 3 houses and write 6 sentences about them using these ideas. And then we need to work in pairs, tell our partner about the houses or flats, and tell about interesting facts. Let's check it against the criteria. Do we focus on the meaning? Well, definitely, because we want to communicate the message. There is a gap. We talk about the houses that we know. There is a relative linguistic freedom, so we can use any words we want, but we have some ideas, some guidance here. The question is, what's the communicative outcome? We communicate to do what? Like just to talk about homes? Well, it's possible, but there is a way to kind of tweak it a little bit and make it even more communicative. For example, what if we ask our students to write write sentences about the houses or flats that they know, and then we ask them to compare their houses and choose the best house for a family of 4 kids, or 2 college mates, or a single 40-year-old who works remotely. So basically what I do, I introduce a little element here. I just write these on the board, and then I ask my students to choose the best house for these categories. That's it. And now communicative outcome is there. What we achieve by the end of this activity, we make sure that everyone has a house to live in. So we kind of match people and the houses. Awesome, perfect. Now, task-supported lesson. We got this. Let's now look at the task-based lesson, shall we? So when I look at comparatives and houses, I'm trying to think about the context where these naturally come together. So some real-life situation where all of these would come naturally. And the idea that I got was renting a place for a short stay. Vacation is upon us, so I'm thinking about renting. So imagine you find a beautiful ad with the beautiful pictures. You want to see it there, and then you come there, and this is what you see. And well, yes, chances are you are not going to be happy with all of that, and you are probably going to write a little review. comparing it and saying that the original place is smaller, it's dirtier, it's not as fancy as the one that was advertised. So let's see how I would structure this lesson. We would start with a pre-task, where I would ask my students some general questions just to help them generate ideas, maybe activate what they already know about the topic. I would then ask them to write a review. I might provide them with some pictures to give them something to use for ideas. And then as a post task, depending on what they produce during task 1, we could go many different ways. I could teach them comparatives and superlatives if they're struggling with that. But remember, this is like B1 plus students, so maybe they already know superlatives. What I'm going to be teaching then, I might teach modifiers of degree. For example, it is by far smaller than the place that was advertised, or it is way dirtier. So I can teach them these little phrases. And we can also analyze a bad review right here. So here you can see that they complain about the dirty floor, but at the same time, they begin by saying like, oh, we had a wonderful stay. It was lovely. The location was ideal, but something was bad. So we can kind of mimic the same organizational pattern, start with something positive and then criticize it a little bit. And as a post task, as task 2, I would ask my students to edit what they have written during task 1. Again, it could be done within one lesson, it could be done within a couple of lessons. So it's up to you and your students. Now, lessons, we can have task-supported, task-based lessons. With task-based lessons, we follow a different structure, which we already are very well familiar with. Now, let's move on to a practice part for all of us. It's transforming some typical activities into tasks. So this is a typical activity, like vocabulary exercise, where students need to fill in the gaps using the money words. I have a little task for you. I want you to try and brainstorm, how can we transform this activity into a task? It could be a task-supported lesson. It could be a task-based lesson. It's up to you. You can use this beautiful mind map by Jane Willis. She kind of put it all together, so you can try and use it for your inspiration. So you can pause your video here, try to brainstorm ways to transform this activity into tasks, and then come back when you are ready. I hope you have some ideas. These are mine. I was thinking about doing some jigsaw reading or jigsaw listening where we talk about financial advice. So I would probably give each of my students a separate advice and then they come together and discuss which one is the most helpful. We could talk about personal finance or personal problems that they struggled with. And this usually generates so much discussion because people love talking about money. And it is way more exciting than just filling in the gaps when we talk about personal experiences. And then my favorite type of presentations, which I would also potentially use with this topic, it's Pedagogic. You know, there are different types of presentations. You have TED Talks, you have pitch presentations, and there are Pedagogics. So Pedagogics, it's when you have 20 slides, no words, just pictures, and each slide is 20 seconds. So I could ask my students to prepare a pecha about money or personal finance. And this would naturally lend us the use of these words that we had in the previous exercise right here. I hope you have some great ideas. And now your beautiful mind map is even bigger. So this is our Spidegram, but we are coming to an end of the workshop. I think it looks pretty nice. If I do say so myself, it looks very impressive. And I just want to leave you with a final thought here.
Хотите постоянно развиваться в преподавании иностранных языков? Школа Дмитрия Никитина проводит образовательные тренинги, конференции и курсы для преподавателей. Подробности о событиях можно узнать по ссылке в описании.
I want to remind you of my This Is Now. Like new students, some of my students have new priorities. Some of them are struggling with loss of motivation. If you can relate to any of that, I suggest that you try task-based learning. It's easy to implement, especially if you think about task-supported lessons. So you just transform one activity and you turn it into a task and that's it. It lets your students see the progress because the value of task repetition cannot be overstated. It's an amazing tool. And it is connected to real life, which is inevitably going to increase their motivation. And I think TBL is beautiful because it reflects a very sensible approach to language in general. Language is not a menu of structures. We use language to mean something. So I think it's our duty as teachers try to create tasks which necessitate meaningful communication. I hope that you were at least curious or inspired to give TBL a try. These are the references and these are my socials. You can find me here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I would gladly answer any of your questions. Thank you.